So, may I ask you, please, to introduce yourself? Wanda, please.
Yes. Hello. My name is Vanda Papafilippou, and I'm a senior lecturer in human resources management at the University of West of England in Bristol, in the UK. My background is in sociology of work and specifically gender equality in the workplace, but also I'm interested in equality in terms of race, ethnicity, and also neurodiversity. Hugo?
Thank you.
Hello, good morning to everyone, and or good morning or good afternoon, depending on when you are listening to this podcast. I am Professor Hugo Caggiotti. I'm a professor in human resources, work and employment at the University of West of England in Bristol, in UK. My expertise is on expatriation, mobility, everything that is related to mobile workers working abroad or working in mobile context, like, for example, multinational corporations in the borderlands between countries. My very big project now is on the borderland between Mexico and the United States, and working in particular of what we call the vulnerable or the vulnerabilities that are produced and reproduced because of this mobility.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. Just a quick question for Wanda again. As far as I understand, you are a kind of expatriate as well, so you don't live in the same country as you were born.
Yeah, it's true. I am originally from Greece, so I studied in Greece, and then I thought it was a good idea to do a master's in the UK, and then I thought it was a really good idea to do a PhD in the UK, and then I'm still here after 13 years. But in terms of how I see myself, if I see myself as an expatriate or an immigrant, I'm not entirely sure how to respond, because I'm not sure if I see myself living here. I'm not sure if I can see myself living here forever or not. So this is the basic line for me about who is an immigrant and who is an expatriate. So this is me.
Thank you. And what about Hugo, you?
Well, my case is similar to Vanda. I could imagine myself as displaced all of my life. Originally, I was born in Italy, but I left Italy when I was 2 years old and almost never come back to Italy. So I remained displaced all of my life. My father was working in the oil and gas industry and for a very big corporation. So I lived between 3 and 5 years in the first 30 years of my life in different countries, from South America, North America, Texas, Asia. I never lived in Africa in my experiences, and probably this is much more technically, and we're going to discuss about this. Some literature could refer to a case like me as a self-initiated expatriate. But, to be honest, I was following my father and my family at the beginning of my life. So I have not the power of decide my self-initiation in the movement from one country to the other one. And then I moved to UK almost 20 years ago, first, not to my PhD like Vanda, but I got a postdoctoral fellowship to study in Cambridge, and then from Cambridge to Bristol, when I'm working now.
Thank you very much. May I ask you, Wanda first probably, if you can talk a little bit about what is expatriation?
Yeah, so if you look at the roots of the word, expatriation means, moving far from your native land, okay? So, however, for me, the line is, although we know a lot about migrations, especially in the literature in geography, history studies, with expatriation, the people who expatriate tend to come from more privileged positions. So in the sense that they are educated, they tend to be from middle class backgrounds. So in my case, I am from a middle class background. My parents were happy to support me with my postgraduate studies abroad. They paid for my master's, then I got a scholarship for my PhD, but still, it was a significant cost for them. And then I was significantly more skilled, let's say, than other immigrants. So I was in a more privileged position. And if you wish, I took for granted that I will find a professional job within my field. And this is the opposite of what many immigrants experience coming possibly, from the global south or from countries that are considered in the periphery of Europe, doing more manual jobs in more developed countries. Over to Hugo now.
Yeah, thank you. Hugo, please.
Yeah, I said this is very, 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 very illustrative of what the concept is. If I can say something, the concept of expatriate is polysemic in terms of they have different meanings. Yeah, originally you will see in political sciences, for example, an expatriate has a different meaning than in organization studies or in human resource management. An expatriate is someone who is expelled from her or from his country of origins, and this is part of the etymological root of the word. So expatriate means in Latin the particle ex in the word means losing. This suggests losing something, right? And patriae is for pater, that it means father, right? It was the root of the word father. So it means that it's like losing your father. So this was the etymological sense of the word, and so it means, and this has permeated the contemporary meanings of the word. It means that there is some sense of that when you became or you are called or named in completely different contexts, like again, political, social, economic, or even multinational context, you are losing something when you became an expatriate, right? We have in Roman languages, we don't have in English, the word pater is also the root of the word patriae. Patria means the motherland or the fatherland, right? So you are losing your land. We don't have this concept of patria in English. We talk about motherland, right?
Yeah.
There is not an equivalent word. So it means that you are losing your motherland when you became an expatriate. This is the origin, and it's something that with Vanda and Tuomo and you, Henry, we have investigated very much, and probably is in the root of why this need of the expatriates, again, from any sort of context, they tend to become together, right? When they are migrants, as Vanda refers to, but also when they are, let's say, high status, right? High status workers working in a multinational context.
Yes, thank you very much. And let us talk about the project we have, Expatriate Bubbles. So what is it? Wanda, can you start to explain, and then Hugo?
Yep. So Hugo, would you like to start with the concept of bubbling, and then I can discuss more about, because it came on
Yes.
from let's start and then I'll give the details.
Yeah. So the concept of bubble is quite suggestive to study expatriate. It was always considered that expatriate they have the tendency to constitute some sort of communitarian lives. Means basically to try to be together, right? So basically the main idea is, if you became an expatriate, or in all of the dimensions that we are discussing here, expatriate, even if you're an emigrant or an immigrant, you tend to be with someone that you feel you have to have some sort of ascription when you move from where you live or where you were born to another place. Yeah, so you move abroad, and there is some sort of tendency, and the whole literature from different research from social sciences support this idea of and from the original studies in the 18th and the 19th century about immigrants, right, moving abroad, to the most contemporary literature on expatriation. So this sort of communitarian inclination of the expatriates and the immigrants to be together abroad. What is the difference with the concept of bubble? The difference of the concept of bubble is that they suggest the idea of expatriates bubbles suggests that they don't only are together, but they try to encapsulate. Right? Again, another metaphor. Right? They try to be together and protect at some point, but with the caveat of not be completely isolated. And this is why the metaphor of bubble is very suggestive. You know, as a bubble is fragile, right? It can burst at any moment, and you can see if you are inside of a bubble, because it's transparent, translucid, you can see what happened outside, and from outside they can see you, right? And the shape of the bubble could vary permanently. It's very adaptable. And this is what happened with expatriate. And the literature suggests that they are permanently adaptable, visible to others, and they can integrate people, and it could be at some point disappear, right? When from some reason the community, the inclination to be together doesn't exist anymore.
I just would like to add at this point that, while we might know a bit about how expatriates, like traditional expatriates, form their communities, abroad. Mm-hmm. So expatriates from Northern America, Northern Europe go to ex-colonies, basically, and they form communities. We don't know a lot, or hardly anything, about how self-initiated expatriates, people who expatriated on a voluntary basis, adapt to the new country, and they form these communities. And what is the purpose also of these communities? Because it has been argued that these communities might caution them from the foreign cultural and institutional environments and impede cross-cultural learning, but our data indicated otherwise. And I think the metaphor that Hugo used before about, that through these bubbles you can still see outside and change the form of the bubble is quite indicative of what's happening in expatriate bubbles, especially within organizations.
Wanda, can you tell me a little bit more about the sample you collected data with?
So basically, so this is part of a larger project that we focused on different expatriates in different contexts. So me and Hugo focused on Southern European expat engineers, expatriates in Bristol. So very few words about why this group of people. So Bristol is one of engineering is the main industry in Bristol, basically, and 9 of the top aerospace companies producing most of the income for the UK are based in Bristol, and most of them are multinational, etc. Boeing, Rolls-Royce, Airbus, etc., GKN. And all these companies are quite active recruiting engineers from, especially from South Europe, because of the skill shortage in engineering in the UK. So this is why we thought that engineering in Bristol was the appropriate sector to look to focus on. We focused on Southern Europeans for the reason because in the especially self-initiated expatriates literature, this group is tended to be presented as homogeneous and privileged, etc. However, there is a literature, especially a emerging one after Brexit, that evidence of intra-European inequalities. So self-initiated expatriates from South Europe are not necessarily privileged because they had, in a way, they were forced to come here because, especially after the crisis, and most importantly, they are seen as the other here because of all stereotypes around Southern Europe in the north. Okay, so that countries in Southern Europe are affected by corruption, nepotism, bureaucracy, backward mentality, and so on. So we are not talking necessarily about this stereotype about privileged expatriates. So we thought of focusing on this group of engineers. Specifically, we interviewed 37 people in total. We 10 Spanish, 3 female, 7 male, 16 Italians, 5 female, 11 male, and 11 Greek, 4 female, and 7 male. Just a note here, engineering is still very male-dominated in the UK. It's way behind EU numbers. So I know that in continental Europe, there are more women engineers than here, but still in the UK, you are talking about 8 or 9% of the population. So we could even say that we over-recruited women in this case, okay? So what we did is we initially planned to do a proper ethnographic study and observe these expatriates in their workplaces, but COVID happened and we just did narrative interviews with them about their life history, their working experience in the UK, and their experience, like within the workplace and outside the workplace.
Can you explain a little bit about their workplace experiences?
Yeah. So basically what we observed, so we used, in order to analyze our data, we used Goffman's theoretical framework of dramaturgical analysis and face work. Just very briefly for your students, what we mean by face work, all of us in our professions, in our roles, we perform, if you wish, a role. So right now I am performing the role of the expert, academic, and the audience, that is in this case you, Hugo, the students, engage in this because you do not interrupt me, you ask me questions, etc. And this happens in every workplace. So we wanted to see how these expatriate engineers performed their role, how they did their face work. However, when the audience does not do their bit in a way, okay, so if both sides struggle to maintain interaction, things might go wrong. So this might be perceived as a threat to the way you present yourself. So we identified two main threats, that these expatriates faced during their socialization in the workplace. The first one was the acceptance threat. So engineers, all professionals and engineers in particular, they had to show that they know to mark their ground so that their contribution, so that they could contribute to the project they were working on. But they struggled a lot to be accepted accept it, especially at the beginning. So one of the participants said at the beginning everybody was like testing me, and this was very, very evident in the case of female engineers, because all of them, independently of their nationality, share their experiences of how they struggled to establish their authority and gain trust, and also socialize. As in the UK, even socialization is quite segregated in terms of gender. It's not that men and women can go casually out for a drink as friends. It might be seen differently. So their intentions to socialize with their male colleagues, because some of them were the only woman working in a team of 60, let's say, were misinterpreted. So this was an issue, and this was also very evident in particularly white British dominated workplaces. Okay, so where they didn't have a strong equality, diversity and inclusion culture, because some of them said they felt judged for their accent, or they felt that they used stereotypes in a negative way, etc. And all of them, perhaps most of them, if not all, used the same metaphor as there is a wall between us. So, which was really interesting because it showed that they struggled to become integrated initially. And the second threat we identified was the competency threat, and this came from the different academic preparation, because in continental Europe, engineering is well established, very theoretical, and all engineers said we are very prepared theoretically. Here in the UK is more hands-on, more practical, and this was initially an issue about how they needed, they felt they were, when they said we need to follow this way to solve the problem, and their British colleagues might not see why, because they lacked this sort of theoretical thinking. So there were some clashes in the way that their professional identity was structured, but so they had to overcome this. So then the question is how did they react to these threats? So we identified, we divided these tactics, if you wish, the front stage tactics. So what they did in front of their British colleagues and what they did behind the scenes, among them in their communities. So in front of their colleagues, a common front stage tactic was to control their face through limiting information. So they assumed a very professional, neutral way. So they were not overtly friendly as they wished to, especially women. Okay, so one participant said, you can't be too polite, you can't be too tough because you're a woman. So they had to build this very neutral professional persona, if you wish. They also controlled their face through playing the role. Okay, so they played the script of the Spanish expatriate. They embraced the stereotype. So I'm late, I'm Spanish. So and they did so more in order to engage into small talk in a way with their British colleagues. Okay, so they saw it as a way of breaking the ice and making their point. So, for example, an Italian lady said, she was the only one objecting to what their manager was saying. And he said, I was expecting it from you because, you're Italian, so I want you to play this role in our meetings in a way. So they embraced the role, they embraced the stereotype, and they played along, if you wish. And also, they controlled face through what we said, going native. So they did what their British colleagues did, so to show that they were fully adapted through adopting rituals like going to the pub for a pint of beer after work, playing sports with colleagues, etc. However, we need to highlight again that this was available only to men. So women could not do this sort of face work. And in terms of what happened behind the scenes, backstage, all of them said that yes, they tend to prefer to socialize with other expatriates, either from the same country or similar cultures, okay, so Mediterranean cultures. And this served two purposes. Okay, first of all, it helped them to master the information game and prepare their script, if you wish. Okay, so they shared experiences, problems, challenges, and in this way, this helped them to adapt to the local professional norms and ways of working. But it was really also important to help them coping with being a foreigner. Okay, so they continued rituals from their countries, like having a coffee or going for lunch later than the British do, or things like that, so that they could cope. And also another very important aspect was that they could either speak the language, which helped them relax and share information more freely. But even when they had to speak English, they could use accented English, and because they didn't care about how they will be perceived, and this was really important for them as well. So that over to Hugo now about life outside the workplace.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vanda. I think that you have almost said everything in terms of what happened out of the workplace, or more the social spaces, in particular in the city, right? So you are right. Socializing us obviously is a sort of is connected, right, to the professional activity of the expatriate in this case, and it's very common for men to try to meet to practice sports, and sometimes to bring the families to the right, but is again a sort of male dominated, right? There is some suggestions that women try to organize by themselves, let's say, right, in the social, right? But no, it's not. It's always a sort of the condition is that the decision of how to socialize is much more. It came from, I would say, what the men finally managed to impose to the rest of the communities. Yeah, I would say that in terms of of showing them in the city, there is a sort of or let's say this transparency of the bubble. There is a very good is related to food. Food plays a very important role in the community, right? So you will see in Bristol, for example, a good number of shops and places where you can buy food from these countries, from sometimes from Italy, but a lot from Spain, for example, and dedicated foods, dedicated shops where you can buy original products that they bring from the continent, from continental Europe. Also, there is a good number of restaurants, for example, again related to the food, right? But in this case, they operate as a sort of discrimination. Like, for example, I know Italian expatriates that they reject to go to Italian restaurants, for example. And they have a very strict selection of places that they consider they can go, and other places that definitely they will avoid. They will consider made for the performing of what an Italian food is for the locals, for the British. They will never be there, right? and this is quite interesting. And I have the opportunity to try. So my idea is to do some field work in comparing what the literature refers as ethnologic food, that is basically food that is culturally constructed, depending on of the users, right? It's very, very common in UK, yeah? You will see a lot of, for example, just, out of the project itself, of the expatriation, a lot of Indian restaurants, for example, in UK, with food that the Indians has prepared and adapted to the local taste that you will never find in India, for example. And in the case of the Italians, I'm very familiar with, for obvious reasons, right? I might consider a sort of expatriate myself, an Italian expatriate myself here in Bristol, right? I would say that the Italian community, they discriminate between what we call more the trattorias. That means that, these places where you can have not only pizza and pasta, let's say, and the other ones that they are more, let's say, that in most of the cases are prepared and are orchestrated, I would say, for local tasting, right? For a much more like the aspirations and again what Vanda says very, very well, this way of stereotyping the Mediterranean. So you have to remember that in terms of the symbolic construction of the Mediterranean space in UK, the Mediterranean, the European Mediterranean, is considered a place for holidays. Yeah, there are some aspects. Obviously, here the class permeates everything. There are some places in Europe that, depending on the class that you belong and the education, could be associated to high culture. Like, for example, some parts of Italy or some parts of France. But in the majority of the cases, the first, let's say, image that the Mediterranean, the first fundamentals of the image of the Mediterranean, how the Mediterranean is constructed in the symbolic space in UK, is for holiday, right? Is for and therefore the food and the spaces is some sort of a way of experience holidays in UK. You see my point, right? Yeah. This is much more the idea.
Thank you very much. I think we can close the discussion about expatriates in general and in particular. If you have anything to add before we close, I ask you if you have anything to add.
I just, it's, I think this idea that we mentioned from the beginning that, we should not see this group as a homogeneous group, basically, okay? And even in this presentation, we treated them kind of in a homogeneous way, like, the Mediterranean, but, there were cultural differences and also individual differences, okay? So, so it has to be seen in greater, like, it's a quite complex subject, and just for those students who are interested in following perhaps a career in human resources management later, I think it's really important to understand employees coming from different ethnic backgrounds, and perhaps do some focus groups or understand. And what came really clearly from our data was that the expatriates who felt included and integrated worked in workplaces where they discussed about difference openly. Okay, so they even through humor or, their colleagues might, is it true that you do that, or like just curiosity. But I think this is really important to keep the organizational culture open and discuss about things openly instead of avoiding the subject and creating the opposite.
Yeah, I completely agree with Vanda. I would say that, the interesting aspects of discussing expatriation from this perspective of bubbles and bubbling and community is that it's a very good instrument to try to be aware when we discuss with students and we address the expatriate complexity in the university is to be aware of the dangers of the easy stereotyping, right? And in particular the misuse of the terminology related to culture. Yeah, so culture is a very, again, complex, it's an extremely complex concept to use. Has been misused permanently, I would say, even academically, and we have to be aware of this, and by putting on the discussion concepts like bubbles and community and this permanently negotiation, we have an idea of a much more dynamic dimension. So of the phenomenon of the expatriate in the workplace and in places and in the cities, for example, right? I always say to my students here in UK when discussing expatriation, you have to imagine this is much more. It's like a movie. It's not a picture. Right? It's a phenomenon that is permanently ongoing. And this is the idea of the bubbling, right? That is permanently adaptable, it changes. It's not that you say, look, the traditional perspective of, look, the Spanish in UK, they do this. The Italian in UK, they do that. Or the whatever, right? The Hungarians in Germany, they do the following. It's not like that. These are communities that are permanently transforming themselves, expanding, contracting, changing, disappearing, and so one rigid explanation will definitely conduct to very, very poor interpretations. So and this is probably what I would suggest. I would suggest when embarrassing with this concept, please use concepts that will give you the richness of this phenomenon, like community and bubbling.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your insights. It was very interesting, and I close the discussion with this. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
It was fantastic.